Salvete mihi nomen est, Stella, et hoc est Batgirl the Oracle, the Barbara Gordon podcast, episode 254 for January MMXXV. A thank you to Roman and Littlefield for the advanced reader copy of Never Sidekick, exploring the dynamic history of Batgirl. And with me on this episode is Tim Hanley, a comic book historian and the author of Wonder Woman Unbound, investigating Lois Lane, The Many Lives of Catwoman, Betty and Veronica, The Leading Ladies of Riverdale, and Not All Supermen, Sexism, Toxic Masculinity, and the Complex History of Superheroes. His work has also appeared in the Atlantic, Los Angeles Review of Books, and the Comics Journal. Today, we are going to be discussing his latest book, and this has already released. December 17th, 2024 is when it came out, but I'm excited to talk to you. Tim, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Super excited to have you. I would love to just start off by asking what your history is with comics in general and then with Batgirl in particular.
Yeah, with comics in general, I've been reading them forever. I don't remember a time when I was alive and did not have stacks of comic books in my room. My grandmother was a big yard sailor and would get me all the old ones. So when I was a kid, I read a lot of like Archie and Little Lotta and Richie Rich and all those, and then got into superheroes as I got older. My first backer was probably Batman the Animated Series that started when I was 7, so that was like foundational for me as a Batman fan. It was actually surprising to go back and watch the show. She's in like 5 episodes. But like to my mind, it's like, oh yeah, Batgirl's in all of these. And then once Batman the Animated Series took off too, they started to show the old Batman 60 show a lot in reruns. So like a third of those have Batgirl, and they're very fun. So I think that's where I started with Batgirl, with Barbara as Batgirl. But then when I really got into comics, like superhero comics, it was the early 2000s. So Cassandra was Batgirl and Barbara was Oracle. So comic book wise, that's kind of where they fit in my brain for me. But TV wise, I go back to Barbara.
Do you have a favorite Batgirl? I know that this might be a controversial question.
I mean, I love them all. I think probably Cass.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Barbara is the best character overall. Like I think the evolution from Batgirl to Oracle and like now back to where she is now. I think she's the most interesting and compelling character, but as Batgirl, I think Cass is probably my favorite. And also the one that was a Batgirl in the comics when I super got into them.
Yes. Well, my good friend Donovan Morgan Grant, who's a huge cast fan, will love to hear that when he's listening to this episode. And then as you go through this book, you also talk about different romances that each of the Batgirls had. Do you have a favorite romantic pairing in any of the Batgirls' histories?
Ooh, that's a fun question. Um, Stephanie and Tim was really fun. Before she was Batgirl, like the mid-90s spoiler stuff, to go back and read all that for the book. Stephanie kind of like popped in once a year or so in Robin to like bring turmoil to his life because he had a steady girlfriend and a whole life, and
Right.
he was just out there having a great time. And I think their romance was a good slow burn that kind of felt natural and fun and like a little different for Tim, who was like such the straight-laced Robin. So I think I really like that one. Um, Batgirl or like Barbara and Dick is classic, of course. Um, I do love the origin of it in Batman Family. That book is nuts and I love it.
Yes.
But I would say probably Steph and Tim is my favorite.
Okay. Very cool. So, how and why did this book come about? I mean, as I look at your history of writing and what you were writing about, it almost seems like it was inevitable. But, why would this, be the time? And then what was your thought going into it and how you prepared?
Yeah, the original plan was for it to be my fourth book. I'd done Wonder Woman, which is a hero, Lois Lane, a love interest, Catwoman, a villain. So I wanted kind of a character that, uh, not a sidekick, obviously, as the title suggests, but sort of a derivative of a male hero to sort of explore that corner of the superhero world. And then my original publisher that I did my first 3 books with kind of changed directions. I ended up elsewhere, did a couple other things. And then when the Batgirl movie got made and then canceled, shelved,
Yep.
erased from all knowledge, um, that entire moment was such a distillation of everything I'd found in the research I'd done for Batgirl when I was pitching the book originally, like 7 years earlier. Um, Batgirl was a character that DC never knew what to do with. She'd always get a unique audience that wasn't the traditional audience the publisher was looking for, and they just kind of set her aside time and time again. And then this movie was exactly that again, the type of superhero movie that could reach a different audience than the usual fare. Warner Brothers says no, gets rid of it, and then doubles down on the past June male-led films that all bomb spectacularly. So terrible for me as a Batgirl fan to never get
Right.
to see the movie because it actually looked really cool. Excellent for me as a writer to have this nice capper that kind of brings everything together and allow me to bring the book back to life and pitch it and make it happen.
Right. Yeah. So a positive thing out of the terrible things that were going on at that
The
time.
one positive.
Yes, absolutely. What would you say is your intended audience for this book?
I think fans of the character, but of all levels. So if you're like a hardcore Batgirl fan who's read all the comics, seen all the shows, um, I think you'll enjoy it. I think there'll be something in there for you. I go pretty deep on all the characters. I love like digging into the letter column, seeing what the reactions are at the time. So like there's a lot of fun stuff. But also if you're just a casual fan who knows the characters from, cartoons when you were a kid or some comics you've read in passing, maybe you picked up like the Batgirl of Burnside trade because it looked fun and you thought it was cool. Um, I think it's a good introduction to this wider world and all the zaniness that happened with Batgirl over the decades, to the history of comics as a whole. And just because she goes back so far, if you go to Batwoman and Batgirl in the 50s, it's a good look at the industry, but also, of course, sort of the sexism inherent in the industry. So casual Batgirl fans, hardcore Batgirl fans, fans of pop culture generally who want to see a unique view into the evolution of how this popular genre works.
And you've mentioned many buzzwords that I will be bringing up in this interview and asking you about. Now, I don't, we're not really familiar with each other. This is like a humble brag, but I only mean it to like set up the question. But my podcast has been going for 14 years and I've been tracing, Barbara, but I've been
But
pacing myself because, starting from the beginning and just doing maybe an arc or a couple issues. And I can understand what sort of research goes into a book like this. And I'm just wondering what an average day looked like for you. Because as I was reading it, I was just thinking to myself, man, I've read so much because you were talking about so much that I had done. And so I'm just interested what an average day was like.
yeah, usually it's takes about a year to write a book, and like I read for 6 months and then write for 6 months. With this one, because I had done so much research originally, uh, to pitch it back 7 years ago when it didn't happen, I had a lot of notes from back then, and then I had to kind of update it and go back to the stuff I hadn't gotten to. When you do a pitch for a book, you do like a synopsis, but then you do a couple sample chapters. So like the early chapters of this book were largely done years ago, tweaked now, but like those parts were done. So what I did with this book, instead of the 6 months, 6 months that I usually do, I would do like 2 weeks of research, I kind of knew the general outline of the chapters, so I knew the time period I was doing. I would just read all those comics just all day long, read comics, make notes, or if it's, shows, watch the shows, and then put all my thoughts together. Probably the next week, write the chapter, and then it's next week, more comics, more shows. Um, I try real hard to read and see everything. You don't want to miss like the one issue that takes your whole argument down. So I try to read everything and get through everything. And so it's a lot, but it's reading comics all day. It's pretty fun.
I bet. Yeah. Now, because it's a book about comics, you would expect there to be so many images, but I would say that there's a dearth of images, but I know that there's a reason behind this, and I just wonder what the process is of getting images okayed for a book because I imagine you had some issues just with licensing and stuff that you couldn't do everything you wanted.
Yeah, it's really tricky to get images from inside a comic book in a published book that's owned by the company. There are legal arguments that you can. unless you're like a full-on academic publisher, most publishers won't go for it. What you can get is what's fair use. So covers are considered fair use and advertisements because they're what's publicly available to everyone, so you're allowed to reprint them inside of the book. So there's a bunch of covers in the book from like key eras. I think there's at least one ad. I think I have a Hostess ad from the 70s in there. It's a classic. But yeah, so it's not as many panels as I would like to show, though I have been, if you go to my social media, I've been highlighting key panels from the history of Batgirl over the past several weeks in advance of the book coming out. So if you do have a copy of the book and you want to go see what I'm talking about, you can check that because I can show panels on the internet. I just can't print them in a book.
Yeah. Would you like to, for the audience, give your handles and what social media platforms you're on in case they want to do that?
Yeah, I'm Tim Hanley 01, Twitter, Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram. I think those are the main ones.
Okay.
Tumblr, I think I still have that's cross-posting maybe.
There's so many now, and I think,
Yeah.
some people are leaving X to go just on, some of the threads is something too that people are on. Yeah, it's an interesting world. To get into the book, I'm gonna pick like different things that I'm interested in talking about. Talking
Okay.
about the 66 series. I teach Latin and English is very important to me. And I noticed you made a conjecture talking about how her depiction changed. And you said on page 22, as if the writers were told to pull back after the early episodes introduced a woman who was too strong and capable. And I did check your notes because I was wondering, where you may have gotten that. Was that difficult to get evidence from that time, from that TV studio? What sort of evidence did you have in researching what was going on within, I guess, the show business at the time?
Yeah, within like the behind the scenes of the show, what the writers were up to, it's hard to say. From watching the show, the first half of that season is drastically different from the second half of the season in terms of how they depict Barbara. The first half, she's very active. She's taking charge a lot. She's in all the fights. She's in the fights by herself, winning them. She saves Batman and Robin a lot. The second half of this season, she's tied up a lot. She's sidelined a lot. There's entire episodes where she gets captured at the beginning. We don't see her till the end. So I don't know that they were told to pull back. That's why it says as if.
Right.
It's you gotta walk the line a bit. But it's in watching it straight through, um, it feels like a shift. It feels like they came on real strong. Even just in terms of supporting the characters, season three had next to no budget. Like there are episodes where the backgrounds of certain scenes were just black and they put like some furniture in front and that will be the set. But they went hard on Batgirl. They got her a full apartment, a full switch around into her secret hideout where she could put her costume on. She got her own bat cycle. It's they really invested in the character, um, monetarily, narratively, really pushed her hard. And then again in the second half of the season, you see her shifted to the background. And also, Batman's not a show that was pushing the envelope. So to have such a strong female character, I think it feels like they pulled
Yeah.
back. I can't say 100% that they did, but just in watching it and knowing kind of the investment up front, maybe the nature of the show, it seems that yeah, they changed course slightly halfway through the season.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're losing slash probably have lost all the people that could have told us, what had happened at that time too, which is unfortunate.
Hmm.
You mentioned letters pages. Letters pages can be nuts. And I think the issue with them also is that only a chosen few are printed. And so you can really only make a claim based on really almost tainted data because editors are the ones choosing them. So, did you also at the time, as you were writing, go back in the past on message boards to get a wider range of feedback and data from fans that were going on? This, of course, would have been more with the Birds of Prey going on and maybe cast and things like that. Did you go to message boards or other avenues of fan debate and talk?
Yeah, definitely. The letters columns are great for back in the day. As you said, tricky because editors like to skew them in whatever direction they want to go. Got to be careful with your language when you're talking about letter columns. I did a whole article years ago using letter columns as an indicator of the gender of a readership of comic books. So I did like a big swath of DC and Marvel, and like every time I mentioned it, I have to use very careful English to say this is not a direct indicator, but it can be seen to be like that. So it's a tricky thing. And message boards, yeah. I tried to find what I could. It's unfortunate these days, a lot of stuff is disappearing from the internet. We all thought the internet was forever. And a lot of the old stuff that used to be just around and everyone would go to is kind of disappearing. The Internet Archive is great. You can dig up some stuff. I think I do have a few quotes from message boards and like old blogs from back in the early 2000s. I wish there was more of it. I wish it wasn't all disappearing, but I definitely did my best to try to get as many different viewpoints from the different audiences for Batgirl as I could.
Yeah, and it seems that at some point they contradict themselves because I remember some of the letters they seem to enjoy the dynamic between Batman and Robin and Batwoman and Bat Dash Girl, and then all of a sudden they're like hesitant about Batgirl, like we don't need another romantic interest. And I thought, what an interesting shift. What's going on here?
Yeah, it's like I think maybe it's a shift in audience too. Like the when Batwoman comes in and the original Batgirl in the 1950s, it's like a lot of kids are reading the books. You can tell just from the type of letters, even like there's a lot of fan clubs. It's like my name is Jimmy and I'm 8 years old, like that kind of thing. And then when the new Batgirl comes in like the late 60s, the audience have shifted. They're a little older. We're dealing with kind of teenagers, even almost young adults at this stage. And so what was fun frivolity for kids back in the day is like doesn't hit as well for the cool teenagers and the well not cool teenagers they're writing into comic books. I was that kid. I was not cool. But yeah, it's the audience has definitely shifted by that point, and you can see that in the letter columns and the ways they react to things.
Yeah. When speaking about Yvonne Craig and how she could fight in the show, you compared her with other well known TV heroines like Mrs. Peel, whom I love, from the Avengers. And I wondered why you didn't do something similar when speaking of Barbara in her Bronze Age appearances so that readers could see how other female characters were written at the same time and whether it was an anomaly or standard practice.
Yeah, that would have been cool to dig into it just in terms of like the fight aspect. um I talked a bit like kind of about DC's feminist attempts in the early 1970s. You get Wonder Woman on Ms. Magazine. You get Lois Lane breaks up with Superman, kind of goes out on her own. It's kind of her feminist awakening that lasts 7 issues until the female editor behind the book is fired. So, like in terms of the larger feminism of the era, I try to contextualize Barbara a bit there. But yeah, the fighting stuff would have been cool for the comics as well. Could have looked at like Colleen Wing and Misty Knight in the Bronze Age. That would have been a good comparison, certainly for fighting over at Marvel.
And this is connected to it. So, chapter three, Vanity and Victory, and chapter four, Family Follies. I wondered why you didn't speak more about what the socio-political environment was outside of comic books surrounding Barbara's stories. You definitely get into a bit with her run for Congress and speaking about Gloria Steinem, but I wondered whether readers will recognize the times and the importance of such a character during the second wave of feminism, or why
Mhm.
there's a transition to more serious stories and her portrayal in and out of the costume in the late 70s and 80s.
Yeah, I hope readers from like the Steinem conversation and the general feminism conversation will understand the context of the early 70s. As it goes on into the 70s and 80s, yeah, it does focus more on the comics than the big, larger societal picture at the time and sort of the way feminism is portrayed. There is an argument to be made that there is obviously a feminist backlash that we see by the 80s for sure. And I think you can see that mapped out onto to Barbara as well.
Did you want to kind of keep it in universe and not have like the outside peek in too much?
A little
Maybe for
bit.
some readers, but not all of them.
Yeah, honestly, too, it's like a page count thing.
Oh, okay. Oh, good
Yeah,
to know. Did you have a limit that was defined for you?
absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. These days in publishing, when I started out, it was write the whole book, see how it goes. These days, paper costs are through the roof.
Okay.
So with like each successive book, they want you to be like a little bit shorter than the last one. So I try to jam in as much as I can. There's stuff that just doesn't make it. And at the end of the day, you gotta look at each area and pick, okay, where's the focus here and what's going to be the best. So yeah, you just gotta kind of do the best and hope to get as much as you can into each one.
Was there something that's left on the cutting room floor that you wish that you could have put in there that you'd like people to know about?
Oh, it's a great question. There's like 100 little things that didn't make it. When you end up going through, it's just like small cuts to take out this and take out that, and you leave it. Um, I don't think there's a big one that I miss. I mean, it's almost 2 years ago now. I wrote it too, so the stuff I took out is forgotten. I have a file with the stuff that's gone that I may use another time. I can't for right now off the top of my head remember what it is, but there is chunks that were there and just aren't there anymore.
Yeah.
Hopefully for the best, hopefully for a nice, easier
Yeah.
read for everyone. That's what you tell yourself when you cut a chunk out of a book.
Or you've just got another book, as you said.
Yeah,
You
perhaps
got you
so.
got to start. Yeah. You talk about Jack Harris and that he had long-term plans for Batgirl, but was then moved to other books. And I wondered if you knew what those plans were, because that was a very
Yeah,
intriguing statement. Okay.
I don't. There's a lot of like, you can find interviews with like these old, like 60s, 70s, 80s era creators that kind of aren't around anymore, hard to get a hold of, or most of them have passed away at this stage. And a lot of the time there'll be a guy who like wrote Batgirl for 2 years, but like say wrote Superman for 8 years. And so that's the focus of the interview. And you just kind of dig through and find like the one little bit about Batgirl that's useful that'll be add something to the book. So I'm pretty sure with that Harris quote, it was something said in passing somewhere, and they probably quickly went on to somewhere else. It's often the case. It's been the case with Batman, or sorry, Batgirl, Catwoman, Lois Lane, Wonder Woman. The writers who do a lot of, or spend time with them, but have prolific careers elsewhere, don't talk about it as much as you would wish because it's important to me. I like to know more, but it's not the focus of a lot of the interviews, especially when you're dealing with like fan magazines and things from the 80s and 90s when it's such a male focus.
Absolutely. Well, chapter 5 was Knock Knock Joke, and we here on Batgirl the Oracle hate hate the Joker, hate the Killing Joke. But you talk about all these comics that were both like the same time and also future and contemporary with us. I mean, New 52 had that. It was still part of her history. Mentioned, I think, Heroes in Crisis, and that maybe like 12 panel where she just takes off her top and you see the bullet.
Yeah.
Why is the crippling of Barbara such a fixed point in history, in like DC Comics history, in her history, however you want to take it? What are your thoughts on this?
It's very weird. It's a combination of things. It's like once she becomes Oracle and like this is going to stick, it's going to be a thing. Obviously, it's a key part of her past and should be referenced in various ways. The trouble is, it's comics, so when it's referenced, a lot of times it's gratuitous and often weirdly sexualized. That Heroes in Crisis run is the whole page is bad. There's the bit in Three Jokers where like she's remembering in the shower as she touches the scar. It's done poorly. I mean, some people do it well. Gail Simone when she writes Birds of Prey and talks about it is very compelling and interesting. Kim Yale did a whole Batgirl or an Oracle special in the mid '90s that kind of dealt with her recovery that I think is really impactful and well done. But in the wrong hands, it can become gratuitous. So there's a reason why it stuck. Why nothing else stuck from that book is a question I do not know the answer to, because a lot of bad stuff happens to a lot of people. And in researching the book, like I read pretty much every Batman comic from then on. And I think like Commissioner Gordon is tortured horrifically throughout the entire book. And there is, I believe, one flashback to it in the decade since, whereas Batgirl's injury is repeated time and time and time again. I mean, the main answer is sexism
Yeah.
because it's comics. It's what they're gonna do. But yeah, there's no other larger repercussions from that book at all except for that. And everyone at DC seems adamant that it remain part of the character's history and be shown time and time again. Even they almost made it in the Burnside run. They had a villain that was implanting memories in Batgirl's mind, and they twisted it a little bit so that the Killing Joke might have been an implanted memory. They didn't say either way. It was in a montage of memories, some of which were real, some of which may not have been. And even that ambiguity was too much for DC. And like that's when you get Heroes in Crisis. That's when you get three Jokers. That's when it all is re-cemented as canon again. It's an odd fixation that again at times creates powerful stories in the right hands, and then at other times can just be too much and just off-putting and troubling.
And Young Justice wasn't that intertwined with her relationship with Cass? Isn't that how it turned out?
Yeah, they tweaked it in Young Justice, I think, to be the, yeah, she gets shot. I think there's like an attack at the UN and Cass is the assassin sent to do the attack, and she protects Cass and gets shot that way. So that's a tweak. At least it's not the Joker, it's not the Killing Joke.
Yeah.
It's you get to the same place in a more certainly heroic way, in a way that's not essentially sexual assault. It's just kind of part of being a superhero rather than a random assault in your civilian life. So that worked, I think, well. But in Young Justice, Barbara was such a tertiary character on that show that it wasn't really explored in depth, and then I don't think had many repercussions beyond that.
Yeah, I think it only mattered to those of us who loved Barbara and it meant something to us. It was
Yeah.
interesting too, and I think maybe I've known that before, but to see it in writing that Boland and Moore regret what they did, and Moore, I think, said they should have held me back. Len Wein, I think he has it is part of blame should fall on him, but do you think we'll ever erase it? Will it ever be erased, or it's just we've gotta it's always gonna be with us?
I think it's always going to be with us because it sells so much. It's like Moore hates it. He thinks it's the worst thing he's written. Bolland, I think likes parts of it, but admits the stuff with Barbara is maybe too far. Um, it was a project Moore never really wanted to write. He just did it as a favor because Brian Bolland wanted to draw a Batman book. So it's odd that a couple of guys just throwing off a story for fun can have such impact. Like it's been almost 40 years now, which is ridiculous. But yeah, I think it's always going to be around because it's a perennial bestseller. There's new comics released every year that do, okay, and then selling like end of year big list. It's Killing Joke sold a bunch of copies again because it's become such a staple. It's the one everyone references when they do a new Joker every 4 or 5 years. It's them reading the Killing Joke so I can bone up for my new role as the Joker. It's the one. And I think like the other Alan Moore book, Watchmen, which sells so much that again, maybe it's nice we give him the rights back and we don't do this anymore. But it makes money, so it's gonna keep
Yeah,
in being such a big seller.
that's always about the money, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm going to read a chunk from chapter 9 being about Cassandra Cain, and there's a question after that. So this is on page 102 because I like to cite everything. There was some course correction along the way, however. Early on in the run, Illage received a call from Jenny Lee, an assistant editor at DC's Mature Readers Line, Vertigo, asking if she and her editorial colleague Cliff Chang could meet with him to chat about Batgirl. Over lunch, Lee and Chang explained that while it was great that the new Batgirl was Asian, quote, the fact that she couldn't speak perpetuated the silent Asian trope with the side order of mysterious martial artist, end quote. Illage later called the conversation, quote, a much needed blast of ice cold water in the face. End quote. He'd worked on Milestone Comics, DC's short lived line focusing on Black heroes and Black creators. And although he'd been fighting for improved representation in superhero comics for his entire career, he immediately realized his own blind spots in the situation. Right after their lunch, he called Batman Group editor Denny O'Neil, and they set up a call with Puckett to write the situation as soon as possible. So I mentioned that that was actually something that I didn't know, so I appreciated that. And then I also think about later in chapter 12, you talk about dagger type and what went on with that, and that there were changes, there were apologies. When does critique like this work? Because I feel like there's always outcry for lots of things, especially like
Mhm.
sexism, and those always seem to fall on deaf ears. So why in these two particular situations did this work and the ship was righted?
Yeah, I think it got to the right person who was willing to hear it. And I think that's a big part of it. A lot of, especially in comics, it can be such an echo chamber of the same voices like inside the room. If you go back decades, so say like the early 2000s when Cass was introduced, it's most of the writers, most of the artists, most of the editors are white men. I think that it was Illich who was a black man and then had this connection with Milestone as well. So like really involved in kind of pushing racial diversity at DC. I think he was, well suited to be receptive to this, having probably experienced similar things in the past working on his own books. So I think that was helpful. That it was from within the company, I think may have been helpful too. A lot of times in this era, and until very recently, publishers haven't been really receptive to fan response, particularly from marginalized communities, women, people of color. That's not the voices DC or Marvel tended to listen to. They do some more now. Again, we see this with Dagger Type. And again, we see it with a creative team that was willing to admit a mistake and do what they could to fix it. Um, a new generation of creators as well with the Dagger Type. That was like a young group of relatively new creators that I think were more in touch with the larger cultural context and were more willing to engage with fans. So I think willingness really is the bottom line with this, and it's not something that's been really common in superhero publishing until very, very recently.
Yeah. Do you think there just needs to be like a new usher in a new age of people who are in control? Like, are we just we've got kind of these dinosaurs that are just, I don't know, catering to the same people that they've always catered to, and so just like a complete upheaval needs to happen for comics to change.
I think we're starting to move beyond that now. I think a lot of the old, as you say, dinosaurs are slowly moving out. At DC, they've really shifted editorial gears in recent years. Marie Javins is in charge now. Dan Didio is out. Dan Didio had a lot of strong opinions about the Batgirls that influenced their histories over the years. And he's gone. Again, younger creators all the time still, I think, are pushing things in a better direction. I think the ship is starting to change direction. There's still going to be issues, of course. It's kind of inherent in the genre. We're slowly working through them. But yeah, I think we're starting to move beyond that now, and things are a little bit better than certainly they were 20 years ago.
I guess connected, if it's the same question, just be like, it's the same question. But editors often seem to be the villain of the story. If I were to pick out a villain or an antagonist from your book, which it's nonfiction, so there aren't really, it would be the editors.
Yeah.
And is it money, or is it, do you think, a set of values that just doesn't align with today's world that causes these decisions to be made that sometimes seem antithetical to what most, or maybe the loudest fans actually want?
I think it is money, but in a short-sighted way. I think a lot of the editorial issues I highlight in the book come because the editors in charge are trying to cater to a very specific audience, a kind of late teen, early 20s, young white male demographic. And they seem to think, for whatever reason, that's who comics are for. They're the only people that care about it. We must cater to them exclusively. And with the Batgirls, time and again, we see a different audiences come in different ways that could expand the potential readership of comic books. And these editors repeatedly say, no, that's not what we do. We do this. It sells this much. We're not looking to change things here. We're looking to do the things we do. And I think a lot of it too, even in relatively recent years, is kind of the culture these editors grew up with when they were, young kids reading comics. It was that audience. It was them and their friends who were all men at the comic shop, at, wherever they hung out. It's so ingrained in their mind that this was what the industry is what the fandom is. And so again, we're starting to see that change. We're starting to see the audience shift dramatically. We're starting to see creator numbers shift and different voices in editorial, which is great. But for a lot of the history I cover in the book, it's very short-sighted men in charge who think there's a very specific audience and that to go outside it is just not going to work and shouldn't even be attempted. It's very conservative mindset.
Mm, yeah. Well, you mentioned the homoerotic imagery and moments between Dinah and Babs. And I wondered if you see this at all with Cassandra and Stephanie, or if you feel like these two, because this is kind of, I feel like there's a trend or a campaign maybe for them to get together. And I wondered if you had any horses in the race on that one.
Yeah, the way they've been depicted, very much a friendship, like best friends now. It's I think Dinah is inherently more flirty than either Steph or Cass. So I think like he's never intended in the text, but like you can read into it with her and Babs, especially in the early Birds of Prey stuff when Chuck Dixon is doing it by accident, which is the most fun kind. Silly Chuck Dixon. But yeah, it's definitely, I think, more obvious. I read the comics first and I was like, oh yeah, Babs and Dinah, they're pals. This is great. And then I did some research around it and I was like, oh, well, they're all shipping this. And I was like, okay, yeah. Yeah, I can see that. With Steph and Cass, I don't think that flirty, close dynamic is quite there. If people want to ship it, great. I think it could be cool. It could be fun to explore.
Yeah.
I don't think it's as yeah, it's not as obvious to me looking back at it as Dinah and Babs were, but it is a thing that could be fun, sure.
Yeah, I don't know that editorial will ever pull that trigger. If they did, I'd be like really surprised. I'd be interested in it, but I just don't know if they'll ever go that route. So we'll see. Well, here's a thought experiment. What do you think Barbara's trajectory would have been like had mostly female writers and creators been in control of her character? And I say Barbara just because that, that's my show, that's my girl, but we can expand it just to Batgirl in general. What do you think that trajectory would have been like?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think you would have seen a character from the get-go who was more engaged in the world around her. There were attempts at it in the 1970s, obviously the Congress run, as we'd mentioned. Um, but a lot of the attempts at feminism in this era were feminism through the lens of, men, often older, middle-aged men, which is not, they, some of them tried really hard, some of them phoned it in, but it rarely worked out great. And I think with, a woman writing it, kind of an authentic voice, crafting the character, I think it would have engaged in a more meaningful way. I think we would have had similar outcomes just because, I mean, maybe this is an alternate universe where DC is a modern enough company to hire a woman to write Batgirl in like the 70s, and maybe they let her go on. But most female characters at DC in the 70s and 80s never didn't last for long. They got moved around. What happened to Batgirl is not unique among female characters at DC, kind of the start stop, little run here, little run there. Um, the way it happened and kind of the audience you generated, I think, are definitely unique. But the general treatment of men get published forever and the women kind of, unless you're Wonder Woman, basically get bounced around. It's just sort of how the company worked. I don't think the Killing Joke would have happened. So
No, probably not.
that would have been good. We wouldn't have gotten Oracle, but I think we would have gotten, if not Oracle's, probably like an evolution. I think we might have seen more Batgirls like we did. It's there's so many Robins, obviously, that to have a legion of Batgirls, even without the Killing Joke, I think would have worked, could have been
Yeah.
fun.
Which we kind of see at the end of Brian Q. Miller's run with his little what if almost, which was
Mhm.
beautiful.
Yeah, that final issue was great.
Who do you see creator wise as having the most influence on the development of Batgirl or even Oracle? And then as a sub question, in your reading, who is your favorite creator that you saw as well as read?
Hmm. I think Chuck Dixon had an enormous influence on the character. Um, Kim Yale was huge. Kim Yale and John Ostrander making the transition from Killing Joke to Suicide Squad, bringing her back as Oracle. That development was enormous and saved the character from being benched forever, basically. So that's massive. They did some stuff in Suicide Squad. They kind of established her as like a tech core of the DC. Also great. Um, but Birds of Prey, I think, really took it to the next level in a way that engaged readers in new ways and a new readership as well. I think that was really important. Birds of Prey was such a steady selling book at a time when the industry was just tanking, absolutely. And that's because it brought in new readers at a time when DC didn't have many. The core was shrinking, and but Birds of Prey stayed strong. So Dixon's portrayal of her was big, and then I mean Gail Simone is the one for Barbara just in terms of characterization and especially in recent times, what she did in Birds of Prey was great. Kind of the depth she added to the character. Again, Dixon was very good, set up this great story, this great kind of framework to tell the stories with the team. Um, but Gail took it to the next level with a depth to the character that Dixon never had. And then transitioning with the new 52 as well. I think in any other hands that would have been an absolute disaster, but that Gail stayed on to make sure not to try to get say the best of both worlds is maybe to understate it, but to make sure her past wasn't forgotten, that there was aspects of the Oracle character that we loved. Did it exist or not? It was hazy at the time. But the injury, the recovery, to make it to not leave it all behind and start completely fresh again, I think was really important to a lot of readers. And I think she set up the character well for the future.
And then your favorite?
Oh, my favorite. Yes. Um, Kelly Puckett writing Cass is really good. Those early 2000s comics where he has to be so sparse with the dialogue because there's the early ones where Cass doesn't talk, but even when she starts to talk, it's not a text heavy comic. And that's really hard to write because you have to explain to the artist, okay, we want this to happen. And you have to tell a story with not a lot of words. And kind of his economy of storytelling and the way he can do it is really impressive. And those books are so fun. And I mean, the art from Damien Scott as well is amazing. It's so kinetic and cool. Um, I think that might be my favorite of what are many, 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 many good runs.
Right, right. Well, I have so enjoyed talking to you. So I've got one final question, which is just what your hope is for this book and what sort of impact would you like to see it have?
First and foremost, I just hope folks enjoy it. I hope anyone who has like a passing interest in the character or super fan or wherever you are on the Batgirl fan spectrum, even if you never heard of the character, I hope you find it interesting and that it's a fun time to kind of explore this interesting character. This character with such a rich history, so many different fun incarnations, such a I think an interesting way to look at the genre. I just hope people have a good time with it. As in terms of impact, obviously, I hope it helps everyone love Batgirls more and kind of garner up maybe some more support for the character, sort of situate the mantle of the character as important and iconic to DC's legacy. Like we know Batman, we know Superman, we know Wonder Woman. I think Batgirl deserves to be in that, not necessarily your Wonder Woman Batman level, but as a kind of a staple of the universe in ways that demand a certain degree of respect and good treatment from the publisher. And I'd like to see Batgirls be even further established in that way. And hopefully, this is a small step towards uh, the fandom increasing even more to help make that happen.
Hopefully we get that petition started to release the the version of the Batgirl film that we all want. Oh man. Yeah, who knows what Gunn's plans are for. I think the only female that's been mentioned right now is Supergirl, right? Besides
Yeah,
Lois. Yeah.
they're doing a like an Amazon's origin
Okay.
series thing, but not Wonder Woman yet specifically, it doesn't sound like.
Interesting. Okay. Well, fingers crossed. Well, it has been, yeah, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you. It's not every day you get to talk to the author of a book and ask their intentions. And, am I reading this correctly? Where would you like people to find and support you? Would you like to give your email address out if they would like to talk to you or just like a contact? And then you've already mentioned your social media handles, but you can do that again since we're at the end.
Sure. Yeah, Tim Hanley 01 everywhere on the socials. My website is thanley.wordpress.com. Um, all my books are listed there and different places to buy it, depending on how you like to buy your books, have at it. And yeah, if you want to hit me up, talk about the books, absolutely. timhanley01@gmail.com. Love to hear from you. Love to talk about it.
I love how it's just straight. It's the same thing. That's lovely. Thank you again. Thank you again for your time and also devoting so much time into my girl as well as the other girls in that universe as well.
Thanks so much for having me.